Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation. I'm Souhila, a third-year PhD student. Today I'm going to share with you my fieldwork experience with all its ups and downs, with its transitioning from offline research to online research in the light of COVID-19 global pandemic, social distancing, global travel restrictions, etc. So I will talk about how the emergence of COVID-19 impacted my qualitative research design in terms of two domains. First, site and participant selection and recruitment. Second, data collection methods. So let's get started. First, I would like to start with a general overview of my research context and research aim. Then I shift to talking about the research design before COVID-19 and after COVID-19. My research drive based on the fact that different school subjects and disciplines have different value. A wealth of empirical and theoretical literature has shown that sciences and humanities do not have the same value. Moving to the Algerian education context, and at the age of 15, students who follow the academic stream have to choose either science pathway or literary pathway to study at secondary schools. This research aimed at exploring how the relative value different stakeholders have around secondary school pathways shapes students' perceptions of themselves, and how these self-perceptions and feelings are influenced by broader socializing forces inside and outside the school. That's all I have to say about research context and aim. I would like now to move on to fieldwork process. How was it before the COVID-19 and after the emergence of this global pandemic in terms of participants recruitment, research setting, data collection methods, and fieldwork staging? I employed a qualitative case study which was meant to be conducted by carrying out students' focus groups, interviews with students, teachers, pedagogy counselors, and parents in 3 schools: urban, suburban, and rural. As it shows in this table, the participants of this study involved teachers, students, parents, and pedagogy counselors. The rationale of selecting from different backgrounds was to establish a comprehensive picture of how pathways are valued by different stakeholders in schools and at society at large, how that different views may have an influence of how students negotiate who they are, how they think about themselves, and what pathway they chose. I also chose 3 schools: urban school, suburban school, and rural school, and the choice of research location is based on the reviewed literature, which showed that social structure surrounding students plays an important role in influencing student choices and perceptions of school subjects. As a side note of who are the pedagogic counselor, which I referred to a couple of times earlier, the pedagogic counselors are people responsible for streaming students either to the literary pathway or science pathway, based on a set of criteria like the student's preference, their performance in middle school, and also the direction of the pedagogic counselors themselves. Therefore, I thought their presence would be of a great importance to the data later on. Moving to data collection methods, I intended to employ face-to-face semi-structured interviews with teachers, pedagogy counselors, and parents. I equally wanted to conduct one focus group with students in each school, and then I moved to have 2 rounds of face-to-face semi-structured interviews with them. The school year in Algeria starts in September and ends in June. We have 3 school holidays during the year. We have winter holiday in December, spring holiday in March, and both last for 2 weeks. We have also the summer holiday lasts for 3 months from June till August. Therefore, I decided to stage the 3 schools, urban, suburban, and rural schools, on 2 data collection phases. The plan was to work on 2 schools from January till April, maybe June 2020 latest, and to let the 3rd school later on in September 2020, as it was not feasible to work with 3 schools in one go. Now we are in that transitioning period, let's say, before COVID-19 outbreak and after COVID-19 as pandemic, of me traveling to Algeria and starting the field work. In January 2020, I traveled to Algeria and I first started contacting some schools. I decided to start with a suburban school first because I have a family relative who is a teacher at the school and who made my access easy to meet up with the head of the school, teachers, and students. It took me around 3 weeks to finalize some official papers that were necessary to an ethical conduct of the research in the school. At the time, COVID-19 started to rage in China and even some other parts of the world, but it was nothing more than a reported news in Algeria, a news that we just hear on TV. In early February 2020, I gained an official authorization from the Academy of Education at my province, where the fieldwork was going to be held. When I formally started my fieldwork, there were no statistically infected cases in Algeria. Or at least in the city where I was doing the field work, everything was moving very well as planned. I conducted one focus group with students and 3 further individual interviews with students and the school pedagogic counselor. In late February 2020, COVID-19 was confirmed to have spread to Algeria. There was one infected case in Algiers, the capital. With no slightest idea that schools would be shut down, I thought of gaining access to an urban school while still carrying fieldwork in the suburban school. The process of school access and approaching potential participants was easier in the urban school than in the first suburban school, as all the needed papers were already finalized. It took me 2 weeks to approach potential participants and have their personal contacts. When I was about to start the fieldwork formally by conducting a focus group with students, the shocking news of coronavirus spread escalated all over the world. As a result, the Algerian government went on national lockdown on March 17th of all social gathering places, including schools. After the emergence of COVID-19, I was put in a dilemma of amending the whole research design. Therefore, I started to think of the best ways to adopt remote data collection as an alternative to face-to-face data collection of my research. There were a few questions that I tried to take into consideration, such as thinking through what were the closest remote data collection methods to alternate the original research tools of this study. How long would they take, and whether these remote methods should have any implications on the timeline of the research. I had also to figure out whether participants would be able to be involved within this new situation in COVID-19, and also what is the best ways to recruit the rest of participants with whom I never met face-to-face, such as parents. In response to all these questions that ran in my mind, I decided as an initial plan to keep the same design processes prior to the pandemic but transfer it to an online platform because I really wanted to do focus group just like I did in the first school. I wanted also to use a video-based online platform because I didn't want to lose any verbal clues. And also I wanted to use the snowball sampling technique, viewing that the time I spent in the suburban school, it was not enough to get to know enough number of potential participants such as teachers. But when you go on the ground, things sort of change. I was not always lucky at following the plan as intended. The whole thing of moving research from offline to online affected my data collection processes at these 3 levels. Starting with the research setting. As mentioned earlier, my original research design stated the implementation of 3 schools, namely urban, suburban, and rural schools. While I could manage to conduct fieldwork in the 2 first schools, it was impossible to look at the rural school because I did not approach any school before the national lockdown of all social gatherings. So I had to remove it from the research. My original sampling included various participants. After the lockdown, I could maintain the same sample of participants, and that is because I took their personal contact and built rapport with them before the lockdown, especially with students, because I used to visit them in the school often. I would talk to them after the class or in the backyard during that midday break. All these factors helped me and them to get to know each other better and made it easier for them to trust me. Moving to teachers and pedagogy counselors. Although they were not the main focus of this research, I faced no difficulties in convincing them to participate in this study. They were so welcoming and willing to help. Finally, parents. I approached them on the phone twice. The first time was about having their approval to interview students, and the second time was about seeking their participation in the study. The parents I approached unfortunately refused to participate. And that was one of the challenges COVID-19 pandemic has brought to my data collection. That virtual recruitment and the fact that we never met face-to-face hindered me to establish trust. If it was not for COVID-19, I could have been able to invite them to the school, just like for face-to-face discussion, where they could build some trust. However, in the end, and after a couple of trials, I could manage to convince 4 parents to have an interview with me. Sometimes I had to ask one of the students' teachers to be a mediator between the parents and me to convince them to take part in the study. Second, having done face-to-face focus group with students in the suburban school, I wanted to do the same in the urban school. At first, I considered internet-based focus group, either written or visual. However, due to some technical and ethical issues, I dropped the idea of conducting a focus group. I decided to turn to individual online interviews as the main and only data collection method in both schools with all participants. The first technological platforms I thought of was Facebook. But as soon as I started interviews with my participants, Facebook did not sustain stable and good connection. Therefore, I thought of asking them to download one of these advanced technological platforms, such as Zoom, GoToMeeting, Skype, etc., where we can access better audio and video forms of communication. However, participants have different backgrounds and ages, and not all of them were well adapted with the recent technological platforms. That's why I did not want to add a burden on them or put them under pressure. Besides, I sensed that they did not quite welcome the idea of facial interactions of video interviews, which was like very challenging for me. Therefore, I had to drop the idea of online video-based interviews. In such a case, the final practice I was left with phone interviews. I asked my participants kindly if we could move to speak on the phone, and all of them approved. Using the Algerian national network, phone interviews were used with the rest of the participants in both schools. Although phone interviews may sound a bit old-fashioned compared to more advanced technological platform, surprisingly, I found it to be very efficient and handy. Although it was a positive experience I had with phone interviewing, this method did not come without its downsides, as using phone calls meant that I could no longer access participants' body language, which was vital to me. All the nonverbal cues such as eye contact, so on and so forth, that were supposed to help to gain better understanding of the data being shared were missed. And that was one of the crucial cultural issues I was faced while doing fieldwork in the lockdown. Well, COVID-19 pandemic had a drastic impact on the world, including the research community. And as a doctoral researcher, my research was influenced by this pandemic at many levels, such as the practical level, ethical level, and even cultural level. However, just like to summarize my experience, I would say that it was true that I gradually had to exclude the rural school from my research. But looking on the bright side, I was lucky in the respect that my study was online adaptable. I did not have to pause data collection like some of my peers. I was even luckier that I had approached potential participants before the lockdown. I cannot imagine what would it have been like if I had not. The whole process of building trust and recruiting would have been very, very challenging and time-consuming. As for the use of remote data collection methods, while limitations exist, but phone interviews, as I experienced it, was proven to be promising and feasible alternative to online and in-person methods in conducting qualitative research. Thank you.